I also have some of my friends here. Dr. Oji is here, Ifem Oji. He is the executive director of an organization called United Diaspora Development Association. And I also see Remy too. Dr. Remy Labo is also the head of the Institute for Peace and Leadership. And Dr. Honora too is heading the Foundation for Sustainable Community Development Initiative. One of their counterparts in Washington called me this morning, and the guy who works with the former ambassador of Nigeria to the US. Yeah, so he probably will be joining us through Zoom. So, and it will be nice also to recognize one of my colleagues also who works with us at CMPI, Robert Benston. He's been very phenomenal. He's actually the managing editor of the journal. Journal of Media and Public Policy, which we publish as well. You can pick a copy behind there where you guys live. And of course, Helen also is also a member of our team who has been working as well. You see her byline on the on the journal as well. And please, can we, of course, I've introduced the representative of CL, the Consul General of Nigeria, and other members from the embassy as well. I recognize all of you. More people, some people are still coming because, like I said, most of our people sometimes don't go to events. That's why we put it by 12, so that by the time they come, we will have been starting by 1 o'clock. So that's said. And Professor Bande is a unique Nigerian. He keeps to time. He doesn't joke with time. He's not the political class that probably don't go to events on time. He is the quintessential academic. Like when he has a lecture by 3:30, he has to be there. And that's character is still in him up to today. Because some of you, I'm sure he used to be a vice chancellor of the University of Sokoto. So he still has that streak in him. And thank you. He was actually here by 12. And so he doesn't understand this idea of African time. He keeps Nigerian time. African time is for Africans, but he keeps Nigerian time. So thank you so much. Some of us to share some thoughts. But first of all, let me say that why we decided to hold this forum. I was at a conference last year or so. I will repeat this when the minister comes. And I told him the same story. You see, I didn't know that the struggle for corruption has really changed a little bit. And until I got into a conversation with the United Nations Office of Drug and Crime, I did a study that discovered that in Nigeria, it's striking. Well, a lot of people disagree with me, but I'm a social scientist. I work with data. So they found out that corruption in Nigeria within the last 20 years of the military regime versus the first 20 years of civilian government, that there's a difference. There was more corruption during the military regime than the current civilian government. A lot of people say, no, it's not true, it's not true. But it depends on what you're looking at. They cite Transparency International Perception Index. But the truth is that Transparency International looks at perceptions, and sometimes perception may not be reality, right? But the United Nations Office of Drug and Crime asks really Nigerians, how many times have you given bribe? How many, certain questions, and they came with some report that shows some measure of difference. So, and my knowledge of appreciative inquiry, some of us know the concept in organization development and the leadership of emphasizing the strength-based approach to change or leadership rather than just the deficit approach, looking at always the bad things, the bad side of stories, right? So, because everyday corruption, why don't we look at it, looking at those areas that were made some incremental progress to see if we can begin to change? Because lamenting the stench of corruption all the time has not changed the situation. So why don't we look at some of the efforts we're making to improve the situation? So that's why we also convened a virtual conference we had sometime last month. And it was very successful, and published a report on that. And there were, even MacArthur Foundation was also joined us in that conference, because there was some elements, some improvement being recorded in Nigeria. We're not there yet, but it's still challenging. So at that conference I was talking about, I didn't realize, I never knew about a place called Jersey. I didn't know about New Jersey. So some of you may know the place, but I never knew about a place called Jersey. There's an island between France and UK. Very tiny island. If you Google it, you see it. Life is flourishing there. So it was at that conference from the United Nations Office of Drug and Crime that I realized that some former officials of the Nigerian government stole some money and stashed it over there, right? And the Department of Justice in this country helped to get that money and instructed that it has to be devoted to infrastructure development in Nigeria. And this government did that. I traveled to Nigeria early this year. One of the projects was the second Onitsha Bridge. I'm not a government official. Don't think I'm blowing the trumpet for the government. But there's no reason for me to do that. But I'm telling you what I've observed. So I saw the second Onitsha Bridge, and there was some progress being made there. It's almost 3/4 completed. Then there's another one in Lagos Ibadan Expressway. The other one in Kaduna Kano Expressway or something. That's where they invested about almost $300 million, right? From recovered assets. So I said, this is good. I called my friend Sheikh Garaba, he is the president. Why are you guys not talking about this? You know, because the truth is that negative stories sell, right? And part of my own passion is to tell African stories in a better way, because the truth is that most times African stories are drowned and the negative ones are the ones we hear about. Just this past May, I was in Poland at a conference where I shared the same panel with John Sullivan. He was the former speechwriter of Margaret Thatcher. So when we finished the session, we were having a banquet. You know, your speech was nice, da, da, da. So I go in there as an American, right? But my accent will always reveal me. Where are you from? I said, I'm from Nigeria, right, originally. So, and he said, oh, something, a lot of things happen there, isn't it? That's what he's saying. I said, like what? He said, corruption and insecurity. So I laughed so hard. And I tried to play the good Nigerian. I said, no, it's all media stuff, you know. Is there any place where there's no corruption, where there's no stuff? But that's what I get all the time when I travel around the world. And it gives me concern. That's why I thought this could be my own contribution, perhaps, to the country. And also, in fact, that's why I devoted that particular event, October 1st, to this issue about changing the discussion about corruption in Nigeria. It's just one element. There are a lot of things we can do individually as friends of Africa, friends of Nigeria, and even as Nigerians themselves, to change the story of the continent. And that's what we try to do. You know, it's not just because I'm a Nigerian. I'll be able to. This is the third time actually we're hosting a Minister of Justice from an African country. We had hosted the Minister of Justice from Uganda, Otafere, Kahinda Otafere. He was here in 2008. We hosted the other one from Zambia, who was here in 2014. We actually had a session for him at the UN. So it's something we do because we believe that the rule of law is key to any development in any particular part of the world. Most of us probably like United States because there is some semblance of rule of law. You know, you can go to court and believe that you can get justice, sort of, right? It's not that it's 100% okay, but that's the aspiration. So we think we can do better in the continent if we do the right thing. And it's true, some of us are no longer there, but there is a concept, we talk about brain drain so much all the time, but today we're talking about brain circulation and a situation where some of us here can connect with the continent and contribute even though we're not there. All right? So some of us may have left, but we still contribute. I'm sure Professor Banda also does that. I'm a visiting professor at one of the universities in Nigeria. I still, like during summer, go to offer my services in one way or another. So there are ways we cannot contribute. I keep telling people, all of us cannot become president or governor of a state to make change. We can bring change you want in different capacities. So join us in this struggle to see to what extent we can contribute in changing the face of governance in Africa. Thank you so much.
Dr. Eckwood, thank you so much for inviting me to join you on this very important program today. I think it's really an important component that you've identified by including journalism represented in what's the solution to the problem. And you might say, well, journalism can be part of the problem, and that's true too. But in principle, if we have independent journalism that's objective, then we can have journalism act as what we sometimes call the fourth estate. And it's the idea that journalism can be an informal branch of government that keeps a check on the other branches of government, so that its main function really is this, what I call the watchdog function, or to observe the formal branches of government and to investigate, and if corruption is discovered, to expose that and report that to the public. So that's, in theory, the best journalism. Now, part of the problem that's developed in the last, say, 20 years, I would argue, is that increasingly, not only is society polarized and fragmented, but people are questioning journalism, and some kinds of journalism have lost some of their objectivity. And so you get journalism that can sometimes be very partisan, and you get a news organization that reports everything from a particular point of view and advocating for a particular political viewpoint or protecting certain interests. So what we need to do, I think, if we move toward a future where journalism can help in addressing the problem of corruption, is a journalism that is independent and that is objective in reporting the facts. Now, part of what's developed over the last 20 years, really since about 2004, is the rise of social media. And part of what's happened is, in years before that, journalism acted as the main gatekeeper of news and information in society. And the news and information that journalists would collect was thoroughly vetted and was checked by gatekeepers. Now, some voices never got heard. So I'm not saying this was a perfect model. All I'm saying is it was a model in which the facts were checked before they were published. With the rise of social media, we have a situation where it's almost a free-for-all. And there's so much misinformation now. And this is where healthcare becomes a very important part of the story. Because there's so much misinformation about the pandemic, about vaccines, about mask wearing, and whether we can address this through public policy that's advancing scientifically based healthcare strategies. And so there's this huge problem that has arisen with social media being a platform where just misinformation flows right alongside quality information. And so it winds up being the citizen who sees all of this and doesn't know when they can trust what they see. And so along the way, in the last 2 decades, public trust in journalism has fallen to historic lows. So the public now is increasingly thinking that, they can't trust a lot of the news sources that they've seen become more polarized. And maybe they shouldn't trust some of those sources. But I think that there are potential solutions. One of them is, I would argue, more transparency. I think that governments can use the same approach, but certainly journalism and news media in general should take the approach of being more transparent. Transparent in the stories they're working on, what are the sources of information they're relying on, how have they checked the facts, and so just making all of that publicly available through the internet, so that even if you're printed or you're on the air on radio or television or you're online, you can make all of your data sources, all of the information you've collected, all the information that you've fact-checked, you can make that available through the internet so people can see what have you done to verify the truthfulness. And I think that that will go a long way toward the public recognizing when a story says there's corruption. If the public can see what are the sources that the journalists have used to make this assertion, they'll know whether it's a legitimate, truthful assertion or whether it's just it's corruption on the part of journalism. So that's, I think, the first step is to be more transparent. A second step, I think, is there needs to be more collaboration. And collaboration can take many forms. It can be collaboration between journalists at different news organizations. Many of the problems you pointed to in one African country probably exist in another country and in another country, and they're not that different. And journalists can work collaboratively to investigate those different situations across borders. So this kind of cross-border journalistic collaboration, I think, can really be helpful, because one of the problems that journalism has faced over the last 20 years is the revenue that used to sustain quality journalism has flowed away from traditional news media and goes instead to the online digital platforms like Google and Facebook and Twitter. And so news organizations have to do more with less. They have fewer resources. They have seen their staffs shrink. They have more important stories than ever about healthcare, the pandemic, corruption. But the only way to do these stories well, I think, is to collaborate with other journalists who share interests and can use digital tools to do the same kind of investigation in different countries, and then to report that. So I think that's the second part. And then the third part of this is to work more closely with the public. So sometimes people call this citizen journalism. Maybe a more accurate term is citizen reporting, because now virtually every person in every city has access to some sort of a mobile device. And with that mobile device, they can share their own reporting, whether it's video that they've captured, photos they've taken, or just observations they've made, and can make that part of the local journalism. And so bringing that into the formal journalistic reporting process, I think, will really be helpful as well. Because you may have millions of citizens, you're only going to have a handful of journalists, and they can't be everywhere to cover every story. But the citizens can be mobilized and can be trained, in a sense, to do quality citizen reporting. They can follow certain methodologies that news organizations present so that the information can be obtained in a way that's more objective than might traditionally be able to, captured by a normal, everyday citizen. They see things from their point of view, but we can try to make it a more objective process. So I would argue that journalism is a vital part of the process of exposing corruption, investigating it, presenting it where it's found, whether it's on healthcare information and misinformation, or in any other area where there might be corruption. Corruption in healthcare, I would argue, is misinformation usually, and in other areas it might be financial, and it might take other forms. And to be more transparent in the process, to do more cross-border journalism, and to collaborate, to bring the public in as citizen reporters, so that everybody, this is the problem that we all share. So the public engagement, I think, is critical, not just as an audience, but somebody who is part of helping to tell the story and doing it in a very local way. Because sometimes we think of these stories as it's the whole country, but sometimes the story is more about what's happening in your local community, in your neighborhood, on the street where you live. And citizens can help report those parts of the story, whether it's in healthcare or other areas of corruption. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Like Brenda talks about, sunshine is a disinfectant, and sunshine, is a metaphor for real journalistic, work. And another thing that he also talks about that is also important today is local reporting, because a lot of times I've spoken to even journalists in different parts of Africa on this issue. Everyone wants to go to the center. Like, let's say in South Africa, everyone goes to Johannesburg. In Nigeria, everyone goes to Abuja, want to know what's happening in Asoro and stuff like that. But the reality is that there are a lot of things that are happening in the villages, and they are so much grossly underreported. So that's what people don't really know. A lot of things are happening, in the hinterland, and they are very part of the process. So the moment we recognize that and pay more emphasis to what is happening in the village, but there are lots of corruption also going on in the villages as well. That's the funny thing. It's not just at the center, right? So I can tell you a very funny story. In my village, for example, they said, "Oh, there's no light over there, right?" They were owing a lot of money to the public power supply. It's about 1 million whatever naira, right? So the chairman of the community now said it's 1 million. We found out it was $400,000 naira, and we paid the money. And he got angry. What did you have to go and pay? Why didn't you go through me? So, and this is a person who stayed there and be complaining about the president of Nigeria, right? That he did this and that, but at your own level, you're even doing things worse than you're accusing the person, all right? So there are lots of things we need to do. So transparency has to start from the grassroots. It's very critical. So thank you so much for bringing that aspect. And I think we can listen to the ambassador.
Thank you very much, Dr. Uchenna Oko, for this very timely invitation for me to participate in this important event. I think there is no doubt the importance and relevance of the topic of tackling corruption in Africa and evaluation of tested models is indeed pertinent. I want to acknowledge, of course, in absentia, Honorable Minister Salami, and also my dear brother here, Tijani Bande. And I can confirm what you said about him earlier is very true. There's few Nigerians I know keep time. He is one of those, yeah. So very punctual, and you can see I found him here already waiting for all of us. Let me say that this subject is very important today because it also takes place at a time when all of us, especially African countries, we are grappling to respond to the devastation of the COVID-19 pandemic. This is one of those scenarios which has really, I think all of you have followed what has been reported across the globe in terms of procurement systems, reports of misappropriation of funds which were intended to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. So it is therefore a very timely subject because this experience, which is not only a health emergency, but also a humanitarian and developmental emergency, is also exposing a lot, including situations regarding corrupt practices. So as we try to build back better and rebuild from this COVID-19, it has to take place certainly in a corruption-free environment, because we all need to ensure that every dollar that comes or is generated by our economies is accounted for to enable us to respond better to the challenges of our time. So I've been asked to share a little bit about our own experience in Botswana. And I really appreciate your acknowledgement that our own models can also assist in this very important dialogue in answering some of the very pertinent questions that we all are asking. What to do, and also where can we find in our own continent those models that have been tested that can also be learned from in our own region. And I'm very happy that you have chosen Botswana also to share our own experiences. Let me just say, for us in Botswana, the answer really lies with the strength of institutions as part of our governance and the framework. I think we all agree that without institutions that can safeguard the interests of everyone, nothing can really be best organized. So the strength of institutions in our case in particular is also dependent on the extent to which those who are manning those institutions are also seen to be people of highest integrity and not themselves also tainted by the same activities that they are entrusted to really assist. So we all know the dangers of institutionalized corruption. So it becomes even worse if those who are the custodians of ensuring combating corrupt practices are themselves part of it or are assisting it. So in our case, really, it all starts with the institutions. It also builds on the ensuring that those who are entrusted these responsibilities are also seen as persons of certain high integrity and professionalism. I would just speak to some of our institutions that are on the ground, which are dealing with this issue of corruption. In our case, we've got the lead agency, which is the Directorate on Corruption and Economic Crime. This agency, it has a wide range of powers, and it in fact enjoys one important aspect which really renders it effective, is that it has to enjoy some form of operational independence so that it doesn't get influenced unduly. And it also applies a three-pronged strategy of investigation and prevention and public education, and I'm happy that John brought this up as well. So through the investigative powers, the DCEC, as we call it, the abbreviated form, it can conduct, of course, it has the power to arrest, to trace, and even freeze assets, to search and even seize, and to confiscate even travel documents for those who are suspected to have engaged in malpractices. And it does play a big role also in terms of determining the procedures for extradition of any suspect. Then I think the division of labor, which I believe John was also touching upon as well earlier, it's also very important. Once it has done that, the DCEC then makes recommendations to a different entity, which is the Directorate of Public Prosecutions, the DPP, which is then the entity that is responsible for conducting the necessary prosecutions. So, expanding on the point that John was raising, DC's work on prevention and education also involves auditing the procedures and the structures within ministries, for example, and other agencies, so that they identify any situations that could lead to corruption before it turns into actual corruption. This is done in our case with the support of the anti-corruption committees. We have got anti-corruption committees in every ministry in our country. So that is almost a 24/7 kind of situation observance, which then actually feeds into the primary entities like the DCEC and the DPP, so that they report situations as and when they observe them before they graduate to actual cases of corruption. Again, speaking to the points that were made, in Botswana, I mean, combating corruption is not a one-time process. It's a holistic process that prioritizes, for example, incorporation of the relevant materials in the curriculum in schools as well, and the training of public servants, and also the outreach activities that John was talking to earlier to the wider community. So this is done in the form of campaigns and anti-corruption, awareness raising, like we do workshops and seminars. Our experience in doing so is that even if you have really sound anti-corruption frameworks and guidelines, which are only known to those who are responsible for enforcing them, as I mentioned, we have in our case the DCEC and the DPP. Those frameworks and guidelines are as good as not existing if everyone else in our societies and communities do not know, including the innocent, the regular citizens. I think John was touching on this. It is important at all times to create the right awareness to every citizen so that they can know what really corruption looks like, and also what to do when they see anything that appears to them to be a corrupt tendency. For us, because of the good work that the DCEC itself has done, and of course joining with the public, there's always the importance of having that accompanied by the highest level of political buy-in by the government and those in leadership positions. I think many of you would already know that we as a country generally, we have managed effectively to sustain a culture of democratic and good governance, where there is also quite a greater degree of tacit adherence to the rule of law. So in our case, this has really helped us a lot because it's part of an ongoing kind of inculcation of values that are really helpful when it comes to knowing what is wrong and what is right. So I know you have read a lot about how we have fared. Of course, I fully agree with you. Sometimes perception indices are not really an accurate measure. But we are lucky that at least that measure has always rated us fairly well in regard to our efforts to address corruption. But of course, I would not, as you observed, Doctor, that there is no such thing as zero corruption, obviously, including in my own country, Botswana. We are, after all, we are humans, and I must voluntarily admit that in recent decades there has been quite an increase in some instances of temptations to engage in malpractices, which of course is at variance with what we've always been known for. There is therefore always room for improvement, and I do agree with your point that sometimes it is only the negative stories that get publicity. But where we can get some very positive things that are happening, to build onto that and to also accept that there is room for improvement. For us, our government is continuously vigilant to utilize any opportunities that are available to make improvement. For example, we will soon, as Botswana, undertake a comprehensive constitutional review, which is envisaged also to take stock and also further strengthen our governance and oversight institutions. But let me also, by way of concluding, make additional observations of a broader nature. I think John was talking about transparency, collaboration as well. I should add to that to say, really, it is true that fighting corruption is not something that can be done singularly by one country or one individual there. It is a collective and a multi-stakeholder responsibility. I think we all are aware that our global system has become very interconnected and interdependent. I think you spoke about the cross-border nature of this activity, which does require collaboration. And we also know that for every single corrupt person, whether it is in Botswana, in Nigeria, or elsewhere, there is somebody corrupting them. There is a corrupter as well for every corrupt person. So this speaks to the fact that this has to be something that is dealt with, not only by reinforcing our own internal controls, but also concerted, robust, cross-border collaborative mechanisms, as you rightly said. I can only say that I think as African countries, we should also really make an effort to deal with this in our own individual countries. I know Prof is here. We know him to be very passionate about this issue of closing loopholes that enable illicit financial flows. I know Nigeria has been very key in this debate, which is also still in the United Nations. This we need to do certainly because it will be in accordance with the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, which was part of the UN development processes. And also, we have got the UN Convention Against Corruption. We already, many of our countries, including my own country, we are party to these processes, and they speak really to the need to address corruption. And we should, as African countries, do our best to work within these frameworks. But it won't be complete without the international community, as I mentioned already, that they also have to develop and share good practices. We see some movement, although it is modest movement. The asset return, which I know Prof. Tijani Bande is very also engaged with us in the UN, is something that I see a few countries amenable to doing this. Let us have as many of them do it so that anything that was misappropriated from our continent without due process, Your Excellency, is returned back to places of origins. Let me also acknowledge that for me, as the current president of the UN Economic and Social Council at the United Nations, it's really disheartening to note that if we do not address corruption and illicit financial flows, we really are missing a good opportunity to raise the revenues that we need, not only to respond to the current challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic. We also have, of course, the duty to attain the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And we are in the last 9 years, and it will be 8 years sooner before the decade of action that we need to accomplish these clauses. We already know that the financing gap for to meet the obligations we have on the 2030 Agenda has already been unachievable. And it has been compounded also by the COVID-19 pandemic, and it's widening by the day. So we must therefore use this opportunity really to not only learn lessons from this pandemic, but to also take transformative measures that will enhance our ability to mobilize sufficient domestic resources in order to complement ODA and FDI, which are still relevant today. I think we can do much more really to ensure that every dollar and every penny that is generated by our economies, including effective means of taxing and collecting revenues, is really accounted for. And also the scourge of corruption is eliminated. I think we can go a long way really in mobilizing sufficient resources domestically so that we reduce dependence on official development assistance and foreign direct investment. So let me thank you again for this opportunity and also acknowledge the presence now of Honorable Minister.
And the good thing about Botswana is that it's one of the best countries in Africa in terms of governance, and of course they have won several awards, So, and you can imagine one of the reasons perhaps why we said, okay, he's come and share some of his own ideas, and you can see that we didn't make a mistake by inviting him. So we want to share the good stories. Like I said earlier on, the point is that there are a lot of good things happening, but we need to talk about that. Part of our agenda is to talk about the positive events happening in Africa, because if you don't tell your story, other people will tell the story, and they will not tell it the way you tell it. So no one can tell our stories better than us. That is truth. And in also telling our story, we also try as much as possible to tell ourselves the hard truths. It may not be convenient, but we have to listen and improve from there. My pleasure to welcome the Minister and the Attorney General of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, who is here. Mr. Abubakar Malami, Senior Advocate of Nigeria. For some of you who don't know the meaning of SAN, especially non-Nigerians who are here, a SAN is a very important recognition when you have attained a certain level in the practice of law in Nigeria. I studied law in Nigeria, but I'm not practicing, and I never practice one day. But I envy him and envy all the people who do have that recognition. So I will not really introduce him because it looks like he just came in as your time is about to speak. I will try to do a recap of a few things we discussed before you came, and also not waste so much time. I told the story of why we insisted on inviting you. Part of it was that I was at a conference early in the year, sometime last year, and I discovered that the corruption in Nigeria is changing, and probably not changing in the sense that the approach to tackling corruption or the results are yielding better fruits, right? But a lot of people disagree with me, and some people still disagree because they think initially I thought it was more. That was my perception. But on basis of facts that I gathered from United Nations Office of Drug and Crime, I was able to conclude that there's a difference between what is happening now in the current civilian government versus what happened in the last military administration. So there is enough evidence to prove that corruption was more in the last 20 years of military regime versus 20 years of the civilian government. And I also spoke about how I discovered some of the repatriated funds from Nigerian government, the previous governments in Nigeria, and how they are being put to use in building infrastructure in Nigeria, even though people are not talking about that. I had already sent a message to the press secretary to the president, Sheikh Garba, and told him that they're not telling stories about what's going on, right? So in that conference we had on our own, most of the participants complained that there wasn't a government presence to tell the government part of the story. I admitted that I was not a government official, neither was I appointed by any government to work on behalf of the government to tell their stories, but I was just doing something which we've been doing to other African countries. We've had the privilege of hosting the Attorney General and Minister of Justice from Uganda in 2018 and that of Zambia in the past. So it's not just a Nigerian, but I happen to be a Nigerian, so that's why it looks like, there's a self-interest in this. But whatever it is, Africa is Africa, and the progress of Nigeria is important to us.
Thank you.
So because, like I stated in the overview, $140 billion is lost in corruption in Africa, and that's huge. That can transform that continent. The data says that even electricity supply can reach everyone. That thing can provide electricity supply for a lot of African countries for some days, right? Which of course is a luxury. We talk about African Free Trade Area, the new trade agreement that we believe will power Africa. The success of that will depend on how we tackle corruption, right? The initial video we played from Professor Schwartz talking about healthcare in Africa. Also, healthcare will improve if we're able to tackle corruption. Even governance itself, elections, can be more transparent if we tackle corruption. There are lots of benefits we can get from anti-corruption practices, right? We recognize that corruption, the struggle for corruption can be different in different African countries and the approach are different, just like we heard from our friend from Botswana. Nigeria's approach is different, Ghana's approach is different. However, the point is that there has to be some realistic and achievable and tailored approach that are specific to each country. And this, I believe, we'll hear from the top law enforcement official from Nigeria, Ambassador Malami. But I will stop so far because I know that most of us are pressed with time, even the ambassador. But I really want to thank you for making time to come, because I understand that he's going to fly back to Nigeria tonight. You can imagine. So he left all the things he was doing from Atlanta to come to this particular event. That's why we had to spend time waiting for him. So I really appreciate the fact that you're able to make it, sir. Thank you so much. on behalf of the Center for Media and Peace Initiatives and the entire team, we thank you for making this possible. We'll get to introduce other members of the team to you in due course, but for want of time, I'm going to invite his special assistant, Dr. Umaru Gwandu, to formally really introduce the minister so that he can do his presentation. And because we're going to have a Q&A and a formal presentation to the minister. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure to introduce Abubakar Malami, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, the Honorable Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice. Abubakar Malami is a Senior Advocate of Nigeria. He is the longest serving Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice, Federal Republic of Nigeria. He was born in Birnin Kebbi of Birnin Kebbi local government area of Kebbi State on the 17th day of April 1967 to let Honorable Kadi Malami Nasarawa and his loving wife Haja Halima Malami. The young Abubakar had his educational life in Kebbi, Sokoto and Borno states. He went to the College of Legal and Islamic Studies, Sokoto, to obtain a diploma in Sharia and Civil Law. His love for the legal profession made him proceed to Usmanu Danfodio University, Sokoto, where he studied Common and Islamic Law and later obtained his BL from the Lagos campus of the Nigerian Law School. He was eventually called to the Nigerian bar in the year 1992. On completion of his National Youth Service in 1993, Malami's desire to cap his professional life with administrative skills motivated him to enroll for a master's degree program with the University of Maiduguri, where he earned master's degree in public administration, MPA, in 1994. Malami joined the Kebbi State Ministry of Justice in 1995 as a state counsel and was appointed Magistrate 2 by the Kebbi State Judiciary between 1995 and 1996. He later joined private legal practice in the law firm of Keti Turaki-san and Co. At Keti Turaki-san and Co., Abubakar Malami rose to become the head of chambers from 1997 to 2002, when he finally set up the law firm of A.A. Malami and Co. and headed it as the principal partner. His flourishing private legal practice, running into a couple of decades, saw him acquiring appreciable expertise and vast experience in such areas as litigation, election petition, commercial law, mergers, acquisition, right of issues, ownership of shares and equity of corporation, as well as land disputes and chieftaincy matters. In the course of his distinguished legal career, Abubakar Malami successfully conducted many cases at higher courts, various divisions of Court of Appeal and Supreme Court. He was elevated to the class of Nigerian elite lawyers in 2008, when he was conferred with the rank of Senior Advocate of Nigeria, SAN, the leadership position of the Nigerian bar, and the nation's highest legal distinction of honor of lawyers. He was honored as a live bencher. Abubakar Malami is known for his trustworthiness, dedication, and proven integrity. On account of these noble qualities, the Africa's anti-corruption champion and the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, President Muhammadu Buhari, vested in him the responsibility of the Nigeria's Chief Law Officer, the Attorney General of the Federation, and Minister of Justice. The Federal Ministry of Justice, under the supervision of Malami, has been instrumental to the attainment of the cardinal objectives of President Muhammadu Buhari's administration in the areas of the fight against corruption, enhancement of the rule of law, and entrenchment of democratic ideals, among others. The ministry has taken bold steps in advancing the rule of law, application of human rights, enhancing the freedom of information, and by implication, freedom of the press, as well as the administration of criminal justice. Malami led the federal government's implementation of many reforms in the Nigerian justice sector, to include increased access to justice, speedy justice dispensation, decongestion of Nigeria's correctional centers, and the judicious implementation of the Criminal Justice Act and justice sector reforms. The Ministry of Justice through the able leadership of Honorable Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice Abubakar Malami's son, recorded tremendous success in transforming the Nigerian justice sector to a greater height. The Buhari-led Nigeria's federal government's fight against corruption received boost with policy formulation, unprecedented political will, institutional support, and international collaboration. Thus so to the several successes in the processes of the return of the Nigeria's looted funds start at various jurisdictions. These monumental achievements recorded were adjudged by the international community to have resulted in the decline of corruption in Africa's most populous nation. Hence, the need for appreciation of this success story to enable nations battling with the scourge of corruption see to the modalities and think of replicating the Buhari-led administration model of the anti-corruption crusade as Africa's anti-corruption champion. May I have the privilege and honor to invite the Honorable Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice to deliver his lecture. Thank you very much.
Dr. Uchenna Eko, PhD, the President, Center for Media and Peace Initiative, New York. Your Excellency, Professor Tijani Mohamed Bande, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Nigeria to the United Nations. Mr. John V. Fablik, Doctor, Professor of Journalism and Media Studies, School of Communication and Information, Rogers University. Your Excellency Colin Vixen Kelafila, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Botswana to the United Nations. Mr. Robert A. Schwartz, MD, MPH, DSc Hon, Professor and Head of Dermatology, Rogers, New Jersey Medical School. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, let me adopt well-established protocols. In making this presentation, I will consider the presentation from two perspectives. One, the successes we have recorded, which I intend to put across first as the basis for this presentation, arising from the policies, legislations, institutions, and associated infrastructure put in place by the government of President Muhammadu Buhari, which translated into the unprecedented success associated with the fight against corruption. I will start by revealing the successes that have been recorded arising from the national and local assessment of the situation on the ground as far as the fight against corruption is concerned. In that respect and direction, I will start by way of making reference to the international assessment of international bodies of refuge, inclusive of UNODC, United Nations Office on Drugs and Crimes. By its report on corruption indices, that is prevalence of bribery by type of public official in Nigeria, on account of which a comparative analysis of the situation is presented from 2016, shortly after the President Muhammadu Buhari came in place, and 2019. A graphic presentation was made by UNODC, and that graphic representation was on the basis of institutional considerations. By its assessment, the UNODC stated, with particular regard to police officers, that as at 2016, shortly after coming in place of President Muhammadu Buhari, the percentage in terms of police officers' corruption index is 46%. But as at 2019, it came down to a much lower level of 33%. And that by implications mean we have recorded within the period under consideration about 13% reduction on account of the policies, legislations, and indeed political will of the administration. Second item that was considered is the assessment of tax and revenue officers. As at 2016, when President Muhammadu Buhari came into office, the percentage indices were 27%, and by 2019 it came down to 25%. On the part of the prosecutors, by the assessment of the UNODC, as at 2016, the index was 33%. As at 2019, it came down to 23%, which indicates 10% reduction. Public utility officers, it was assessed at 22% as at 2019, but remained static without significant improvement and remain at 22%. Federal road safety caps, as at 2016 it was 25%, and then as at 2019 it was 21%. Judges and magistrates, it was 31% as at 2016. It came down to 20% as at 2019, which is a reduction of around 11%. Vehicle inspection officers, 29% in 2016, 19% in 2019. Customs immigration officers, 31% as at 2016, 17% as at 2019. Members of the armed forces, 19% as at 2016, 12% as at 2019. Other public officials, 10% as at 2019, 9% as at 2016. Members of parliament and legislature, 9% as at 2019, and then 10% as at 2016. Again, teachers and lecturers, 12%, that came down to 10%. That is the international perception of the international bodies of refuge. Now, coming back home, let us look at it from the point of the services being provided by the institutions that are saddled with the responsibility of the fight against corruption. I will begin the local assessment with the performance of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission. As of 2015, shortly after President Muhammadu Buhari came into office, cases filed in court were 462 cases. And then the institution recorded 103 convictions in 2015. Now, what happened in 2016 thereafter? In terms of cases filed, about 390 cases were filed in court, which establishes a reduction in the number of cases that were filed in court. But even as at that, taking into consideration the reduction in number of cases, as of 2016, 195 convictions were recorded. In 2017, 483 cases were filed and instituted in court. And then, as of 2017, 189 convictions were recorded. In 2018, 612 cases were filed in court, and then 312 convictions were recorded. Now, what establishes the point that what we are doing in terms of legislations, policies, and indeed institutional support and political goodwill is indeed paying off is the fact that as of 2019, when we had 1,901 cases arising
from the capacity building and expeditious determination of investigation, we had 1,282 convictions out of 1,901 cases that were filed in court as of 2019. Now, in 2020, notwithstanding the COVID affliction, we had in place 1,596 cases that were filed in court. And then we recorded a conviction of 979 on account of the fact that our judicial system was not optimally functioning arising from the COVID affliction. But then the point of interest, notwithstanding the COVID-19 situation, taking into consideration that we imbibed policies of virtual court proceedings, we succeeded in having 2,476 cases investigated and then instituted in court, on account of which, as of today, we had over 1,033 convictions. So this is what is unfolding as far as the gains and successes associated with the fight against corruption in the Nigerian state is concerned. Now let us have a look at the situation as it relates to a sister institution, which is the Independent Corrupt Practices Commission. As of 2017, the volume of recovered asset was around 190 million only. 2018, we have enhanced recovery of over 113 million. As of 2019, arising from the political goodwill, arising from the institutional enhancement, arising from the new legislations that were put in place, arising from associated policies or perhaps executive orders that were bring to bear for the purpose of ensuring the institutional capacity, institutional enhancement of the agencies, we succeeded in recovering 1,167,183,987 naira 69 kobo as at 2019. And that within a year, as at 2020, has increased to 2,927,000,000 naira. So what I am laboring to state in terms of the fight against corruption is the fact that Nigeria as a country has been adjudged internationally to have recorded greater successes, both in terms of volume, in terms of policies, in terms of legislations that translated into significant and massive improvement as far as the fight against corruption is concerned. So now that brings me to the point of what is it that we have succeeded in doing differently that has now translated into international acknowledgement of the successes being recorded by Nigeria as a country. What we have succeeded in doing has multi-dimensional kind of phases. First, we have taken steps, for example, relating to legislations by way of ensuring that we have in place stronger legislations. But even before then, we realized the need for international collaboration. So Nigeria, as a country, has now eventually taken steps to operate within the global community in terms of policies and strategies associated with the fight against corruption. And that eventually saw us playing a key and prominent role in terms of global and international participation associated with regional and international bodies. As a result of which, we now have indeed established a membership of the East African Association of Anti-Corruption Authorities, so as to create an international dimension to our perception of corruption and then strategies that are to be used in combating them. So over and above associating with the East African Association of Anti-Corruption Authority, we have equally taken further steps to consider the possibility of working in collaboration with associations like South African Development Community, SADC, Protocol Against Corruption, Economic Community of West African State Collaboration, and indeed Financial Action Task Force and Egmont Group. The essence of what we are doing arising from this international community association is to create a situation whereby Nigeria as a member state can now take benefit of sharing intelligence, quoting for international collaboration, and that in effect has paid off, taking into consideration the successes we have indeed recorded as it relates to assets recovery. Now, what is it that we have indeed succeeded in doing as it relates to asset recovery, for example? I will take you through to our recoveries over time arising from the benefits recorded from this international engagement. As at 2017, for example, Nigeria, arising from the benefits associated with this international engagement, has succeeded in recovering the sum of 322.5 million US dollars, which were indeed a recovery from Switzerland. Again, in 2020, a total sum, additional sum of $311.7 million was returned to Nigeria after signing another trilateral agreement with the USA and indeed island of Jersey, among others. Also in the year 2020, 5.4 million euros was recovered in March, emanating from an agreement signed with Northern Ireland. So the federal government was also able to recover from UK the sum of €4,214,000 connected to a family of James Ivory, among others. As it is, additional recoveries to the tune of 200 million naira are being anticipated, subject to the settlement of litigations of which the Ministry of Justice is attending. So what I'm trying to say in essence is Nigeria has indeed succeeded in making sizable and substantial recovery, both in successes associated with the fight against corruption. First, with particular regard to the volume of convictions and recovery arising from such convictions. Two, arising from the international collaboration that Nigeria has succeeded in creating over time. But then a further point of interest associated with this is the legislative framework that has succeeded in creating a platform for Nigeria now eventually to have in place a very solid and robust legislative framework that now laid the necessary foundation for Nigeria now to have a greater record of convictions. Which are the legislations that we have succeeded in putting in place that now supported what we are doing in the course of fight against corruption? I will take you through some of the major legislative frameworks that we put in place that have indeed assisted the Nigerian state in having in place a formidable legislative framework that succeeded, that has supported what we are doing in terms of the fight against corruption. By legislative means, for example, Nigeria implemented two main strategies. The first strategy is the anti-money laundering and converting the financing of terrorism national strategy 2018 to 2030 and national strategy for 2017 to 2021. So we have in place a national strategy that has now proven to be very effective, that bring about the desired coordination among the institutions of government. So in policy sense, there are other government policies over and above the legislations that we have indeed succeeded in putting in place, which arising from the political will of President Muhammadu Buhari have come to pass and added value to what we are doing. For example, the need had arisen on our part to connect each and every individual personality that is linked to a bank transaction to a particular number that is known as bank verification number. So the implication of bank verification number is, if you have a bank verification number and then you have in existence within the financial system and institution 20, 30 accounts on click of the number, our institutions, anti-corruption institutions, will be able to link you up to all the existing bank accounts that are now attached to your bank verification number. So the implication of such interconnectivity of accounts to bank verification number is that the financial institutions can easily, visibly see your transaction, and their capacity as far as investigation is concerned is enhanced in terms of covering the field as far as your person, if you are by any chance being investigated for any financial wrongdoing. Again, we equally put in place open treasury portal, known as a single treasury account. And that, by implication, allows greater visibility and consolidation of the transactions of government business completely. Still, by way of international engagement, we identified the need for international collaboration, and we were readily available to be part and parcel of the Open Government Partnership, which is an international arrangement that allows for the visibility, transparency, and accountability among member states in terms of government, business, and administrative processes. Again, we equally have in place what we call Presidential Initiative on Continuous Audit. So what we have succeeded in doing is covering the field, both in terms of accountability and transparency. We have equally a whistleblowing initiative that encourage Nigerian citizens to now keep the system informed of any infractions in the system. So there were other anti-corruption policy measures that were taken by the administration in place, which reinvigorated and enhanced the fight against corruption. Among them are integrated payroll and personnel information system, by which we equally now created a portal that allowed the government to now be seeing what are its liabilities in terms of salaries, wages, and emolument of public officers. We equally have in place special presidential panel on recovery of public property, which now is a policy that now allows for the recovery of government properties, among others. We equally intensify our laws. For example, we have in place Freedom of Information Act that allows the citizens to now have access to what the government is doing, thereby enhancing our transparency and accountability capacity. We equally have economic reforms and government project. We have government integrated financial management information, presidential initiative on audit, among others. All these are policies that are put in place by the government of President Muhammadu Buhari for the purpose of enhancing what we are doing in the spirit of fight against corruption. So the major issues and specific factors that are responsible for the outstanding programs of this administration include fundamentally the political will on the part of the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. The political will of President Muhammadu Buhari is a determinant factor behind proactiveness and effective performance of the anti-corruption institutions. Government policy measures are reflective of the determination of the President's vision to eradicate corruption in Nigeria. Non-interference in the activities of the institutions gave the required muzzle to investigate and prosecute higher profile cases which has seen many former governors behind the bars for various offenses committed while in office. Again, in terms of funding, the president has taken steps to ensure the financial autonomy of the relevant authorities. Their budget allocation witnessed a commendable increase which surpassed all the previous government allocations to such institutions over time. Aside the anti-corruption fight, enjoyed the support of international community and organizations designed to eradicate corruption. Again, in terms of legislations, as I leveled to state earlier, the federal legislature is proactive in budget allocation of adequate resources in the fight against corruption. They are also working with the institutions with the aim of fixing and improving their long overdue legislations. We equally have taken steps in terms of our institutional support. There are government institutions whose mandates are to engage in the fight against corruption and also provide a enabling legislative framework for the fight against corruption. We have in place the Federal Ministry of Justice, which indeed is responsible for coordination of the anti-corruption strategies and the institutions that are responsible for the fight against corruption. We have also in place an independent corrupt practices and other related offenses commission, which I have leveled earlier on to give you an insight as to the successes they have recorded over time. We equally have, in institutional sense, the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, Code of Conduct Bureau, Bureau of Public Procurement, Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit, Nigerian Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, NIETI, among others. So it is indeed a combination of one, international collaboration, two, having in place necessary legislations, three, having in place effective institutions that are indeed supported, arising from the political goodwill of the president, and funding. So in essence, the intervention of these agencies I have stated against corruption cannot be overemphasized. They are visibly noticeable in these areas. The ministry enacted the following anti-corruption criminal laws. For the purpose of enhancing the fight against corruption, steps were taken by the government through the leadership of the Federal Ministry of Justice to have in place effective legislative framework. For example, as I stated, as of 2017, we equally took steps to ensure that we keep amending the Money Laundering Prevention and Prohibition Act to make it in tune with the prevailing realities in the society so that it could be effective in terms of ensuring that necessary support, as it relates to our fight against money laundering, are put in place. So as of 2017, we have in place a new legislation, Money Laundering Prevention and Prohibition Act 2017. We equally have Terrorism Prevention Prohibition Act 2017, which is targeted at providing the necessary legislative framework for ensuring at the end of the day that terrorism funding and financing is indeed arrested, checkmated, and effectively addressed. We equally have in place Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit Act 2018, which was indeed an act that was intended to create international platform for international engagement in sharing of intelligence. As of today, I think there are over 100 countries that are connected internationally to intelligence sharing. And on account of that engagement of the Nigerian state, we have put in place Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit, which is designed to allow Nigeria to engage sister countries across the world in the act of intelligence sharing. We equally have Public Interest Disclosure and Witness Protection Act 2017, all in line with the legislative framework that is intended to support what we are doing in terms of the fight against corruption. Well, we equally have taken further steps in terms of ensuring that we have certain legislative orders that we think could provide the desired support to what we are doing in the fight against corruption. We have what is commonly known as executive order. Before going to the executive orders, I am still on the issue of the necessary bills that were put in place. So we equally have in place, over and above the Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit, we have Public Interest Disclosure and Witness Protection Act 2017. We have the Mutual Legal Assistance Act 2018. We have Companies and Allied Matters Act incorporating the Beneficial Ownership Register of 2020. All these are legislations that in one way or the other have some component, elements, and capacity of supporting what we are doing in the fight against corruption. There are other pending bills as we are talking that are all targeted at supporting what we are doing in terms of the fight against corruption that are pending before the National Assembly. I'm talking of the Parliament in other sense. And these other bills are Special Crime Court Bill, taking into consideration the position taken by the government of President Muhammadu Buhari as it relates to the fight against corruption. We were of the opinion that there is need for specialized courts that would be dedicated to the fight against corruption. With that consideration in mind, we put in place Special Crime Court Bill 2016, establishment of anti-corruption courts and special divisions, which is being considered by the National Assembly. We have in place the Proceeds of Crime Bill, which is equally intended in one way or the other to support what we are doing in terms of recovery of the looted assets. We equally have pending before the National Assembly the Whistleblower Bill. We realize the need to provide adequate legislative framework as far as whistleblowing is concerned and protection to the whistleblowers that have been coming over to now disclose one financial infraction or the other in the system. And we equally have Witness Protection Bill 2020. We have constitutional alteration and amendment to include special courts to tackle corruption cases. So over and above the legislative framework arrangement, on account of which we have succeeded in having in place legislations that have been passed and are sent to the president that are now working, that are now being applied and enforced in the system. We have some legislations that are now pending with the National Assembly that are targeted at enhancing and covering the field as far as the fight against corruption is concerned. But then we have taken the position further by way of bringing about the spirit of executive orders so as to enhance what is in place in terms of legislation. For example, we have Executive Order number 4, which is on voluntary asset and income declaration scheme that gave a window of 9 months from July 2017 for people that, to voluntarily declare their undeclared assets without prosecution. And the intention here is to create a window for us now to work together with the people for the purpose of addressing the regularizing the asset, and they are ensuring at the end of the day that necessary collaboration is put in place. Again, we have Executive Order number 6, which is on the preservation of assets connected with serious corruption and other related offenses. Before now, we were faced with a situation whereby cases, criminal cases that have corruption undertones could not be speedily prosecuted on account of the fact that those that are standing trials associated with looted assets were left to be enjoying the assets while the legal proceedings, judicial proceedings were ongoing. And then we realized the need that there should be first a restriction on the movement of the high-profile personalities being prosecuted for corruption, and then restricting their access to the funds in contention. And we now came up with Executive Order number 6, which now vests the powers on the government to take steps to restrict the access to the funds in contention, to equally ensure their movement are restricted while these cases are ongoing. We equally have Executive Order number 10. We now come to realize that there is need for certain autonomy on the part of the judiciary and legislature for the purpose of enhancing what we are doing as far as the fight against corruption is concerned. And then arising from that, we came up with Executive Order number 10 that is intended to enhance the funding, the welfare of the judicial officers, so as not to kind of create room for certain interferences and compromises. So the Ministry of Justice international asset recovery is outstanding. The efforts of the Office of the Attorney General and Minister of Justice have become a template for other African countries through African Union. In 2017, the signing of a trilateral agreement with Switzerland and World Bank enabled the recovery of $322 million. In 2020, a total sum of $311 million was returned to Nigeria after signing another trilateral agreement with the USA and Valwick of Jersey. Also in the year 2020, 5.4 million euros was recovered in March, emanating from an agreement signed with Northern Ireland. The federal government was also able to recover from UK the sum of £4,214,000 connected to the family of James Ibori, and additional recoveries to the tune of 200 million have been processed in US. So while the domestic recovery stands at around 2,108 million among others. So as I stated earlier, these are some of the major strategies that have been embarked upon by the federal government of Nigeria in the spirit of the fight against corruption, which has indeed translated to a great success as far as the fight against corruption is concerned. So we have also developed a national anti-corruption strategy and a guideline for smooth implementation of the strategy, which have 5 pillars. The strategy we have put in place is a strategy that is rooted in prevention of corruption, in public engagement arising from corrupt practices and conduct that are termed corrupt in spirit and disposition. And then we equally came off arising from the policy with ethical reorientation, enforcement and sanction, and recovery of management of proceeds of crime. So what we have succeeded in doing as far as the fight against corruption is concerned is to develop a strategy that brings in place prevention that considers 5 major pillars. 1, pillars relating to prevention of corruption. 2, public engagement. 3, ethical reorientation. 4, enforcement of sanction. And 5, recovery and management of proceeds of crime, all within the context of international engagement, legislative framework, and indeed enforcement, among others. So I am pleased to inform the gathering that the federal government of Nigeria has recovered funds from corporate bodies and individuals through combined efforts of the Office of the Attorney General of the Federation, Minister of Justice, and our law enforcement agencies through local and international collaboration with the international community and adoption of legislations and strategies that are put in place by the government of the Federal Republic of Nigeria under the leadership of President Muhammadu Buhari. Our fight against corruption, indeed, is total, comprehensive, and dispassionate, devoid of any political or ethical sentiments or inclination. It might interest you to note that former state governors, senators, ministers, and even members of the ruling All Progressive Congress, which is a ruling political party, are not spared. Currently, high-profile personalities, including judicial officers and former governors indicted for corruption, have been prosecuted, and many sentenced to jail, and a lot are serving prison sentence. We have some former top government officials convicted and serving various jail terms for corruption. The whistleblowing policy we have imbibed is also well implemented and has yielded lots of recoveries of stolen assets. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, let me on this note re-establish the commitment of the federal government in the direction of the fight against corruption. We are able to record these successes through fight against corruption as a cardinal pillar of the administration of President Muhammadu Buhari, African Union anti-corruption champion, reiterating at many fora the government's resolve on the fight against corruption by the president, reviving, invigorating, and enhancing initiatives policies and institutions on anti-corruption, and we have taken significant enforcement actions in ensuring that the whistleblowers policy and the voluntary offshore asset recognition scheme are enforced. I thank you most sincerely for affording me this opportunity to engage you on what we are doing in the direction of the fight against corruption as a nation. Thank you most sincerely.
So because it's actually a great chapter for that particular journal. So he's going to talk more about that later on.
Yeah.
So I will welcome the next speaker, after which we'll open it up for conversation, because we really want to make this as conversational as possible.
Thank you very much. I think let me thank the Center for Media and Youth Initiatives for the honor of the invitation to be part of this really important conversation. I will avoid long protocol, but I must be forgiven for being a Nigerian. I must still recognize the Honorable Minister of Justice of the Federal Republic of Nigeria and my friend and younger brother, plus, of course, Ambassador Kalapile, who is a great friend of mine, and of course, the Professor of Journalism who had been brought into this conversation for a very clear reason. I would avoid giving a lecture, and that's why I didn't want to make a comment. What comment would I make when the Minister of Justice, who has been at the center of this really important battle, is billed to speak? Nonetheless, I will make a few remarks. One, to really recognize the really important work the Center is doing, and I acknowledge, Mr. President, the really important work you are doing for the continent. I think the issue is, for me, not just an issue of stating the African perspective, but really is always a learning point. We are connected as human beings. We learn as we teach. And the value of this is simply that there are also power relations. Some are better able to tell their stories than others. But there must be institutions that will try as much as possible to bring the stories of everyone to global attention. That is the best way to really get everybody involved in what is happening. Earlier on, I think the President made reference to the whole question of objectivity and the relationship of that debate to the whole question of perception. I come from a tradition where I'm very suspicious of perceptions. And from a Nigerian audience perspective, it should be clear, very few citizens are as critical of themselves as Nigerians. Some of the things that you will see as level are really commonplace statements about public officials in Nigeria. It's just unbelievable. So you write anything about anyone for days, nothing happens. And so these are the kinds of things, therefore, when you read papers, you hear stories. And these stories, I think, reference have been made by both Professor Public, I'm right about that then. In terms of the new media, I think we must acknowledge the really important value of the new media places, because it also gives power to those who ordinarily would not have been given power. Let's be very clear. Let's admit, without the new media, would not be in a good place in many countries of the world, including this one. As we must battle what the new media really brings to us against our interest as a community or as communities. So the power relations are there, and therefore the ability to tell stories has never been evenly distributed around the world. And it didn't help us during this pandemic that new media can be really used for purposes that are hardly noble and have created further problems for all of us. And therefore, I take the point that was made. and also take the point that I need to be stated too, in relation to the subject matter of corruption, which is really today corruption in the fight against the pandemic is a major one. Corruption in terms of procurement, corruption or ethical issues relating to distribution. We hardly have 8% coverage of vaccines on the continent. And you hear stories of people who can now talk of repeatedly, maybe every 3 months you can come and have a booster. There are issues fundamental to our world that must be addressed there. Next is the issue raised concerning corruption, and I'm very glad from public's point and also from Professor Kolopile and Prime Minister. Corruption pervades every part of fabric of national life in most countries, some more serious than others, including in the developing world. And the African processes to deal with this are there. They are weak because of implementation issues. But we have recognized this as a problem, I can tell you. And the talk about success in fighting corruption, which brings us to the question of recovery and utilization of recovery, is really a very important one. Institutions need to be strengthened to guarantee whatever is taken illegally are returned but not hidden, and people can see why it is important that this fight be sustained. It's really, really important that this be done and be done transparently. Next issue I want to comment on is what my brother Colin, Ambassador of Botswana, who is a very effective president of the ECOSOC, among other roles he has played in the United Nations system. And this is the issue of multi-stakeholder engagement and the relevance of that in the fight against corruption. And we know this, we live it every day. When I was president of the General Assembly, which is at the 74th session, the president of ECOSOC, who was ambassador of Norway and Nigeria, pushed for an effort to see where there are gaps in relation to instruments relating to fighting corruption. We succeeded in getting it, but the push back against it, always said, okay, what are the instruments available? Are they working well? What can be brought at the level even of creating a framework to say, can we do it better? And every country admitted that corruption was a problem. We succeeded, but we can tell or write multiple books concerning the pushback, even from those who naturally have been friends of developing countries in trying to slam institutions and processes. This is the kind of element the Prime Minister didn't talk about, the pushback against the effort. It's just unbelievable. And it's not a national problem, it's an international problem. This ought to be brought into the fore as to why this is important. Next is the issue concerning the meaning of success in fighting corruption. I'm extremely happy with we have known of the story of Botswana, and I can also tell you that Namibia is also doing well. This I know from my relationship with the country and the efforts. There are many countries on the continent that have done well, that we are learning from, and everyone learns from everyone else. Now, this issue of countries connecting to countries and knowing what is brought back, but beyond whatever the Honourable Minister has stated, I can tell you, as a Nigerian who is not under 50, that what it means in terms of deterrence is underreported. The deterrence, people know that there is a high chance or likelihood that something will go wrong if you embark on this path. That is extremely important, not only for Nigeria and the continent, but for all human beings, that the law actually works, that there can be high degree of certainty, literally, that when you embark on this kind of path, it can be, you'll have a problem. I think, let me therefore not give a lecture, but to acknowledge what all have done. But to also say that, Dr. Gondu, because you are my younger brother, I must tell you that as a Vice Chancellor of Danfodio, I didn't think you treated me right. I sit here, and a former teacher at Danfodio was introduced. You didn't say he taught in Sokoto. So that's why.
You recognize he studied law from your...
No, he also taught law.
And taught same.
So please, if I don't do this, I would not have been Vice Chancellor of Danfodio, because we are very proud, not only of our program, but also our teachers. Yeah, thank you. But let me conclude by thanking you, and also to thank the Honourable Minister for the great work of having to even come here and engage, making our task that much easier. Thank you very much, everyone.
The ambassadors of Nigeria and Botswana, a little bit extreme, it's far away a little bit. We're going east and west. So now we've had the Eastern Attorney General from Uganda in 2018. We've had that of Zambia now in the west. So maybe we'll go north next time to cover the entire ground. And of course, my friend and colleague, Professor Public, he's a very unique guy, very passionate about Africa, So I'm happy he's here. Two things remaining. I'm sure the Honourable Minister would like to take some few questions. I know you're pressed with time. However, I would like to make, on behalf of CMPI, to make a presentation, because we have enrolled you into the fellows group of CMPI, because these are individuals that are making change, that are effecting change, scalable change in their different environments. So we would like just to make a presentation to you. After that, then Edward will do a vote of thanks after a few questions, but maybe one or two, because he's really pressed with time. So I'll crave your indulgence to, have some kind of dialogue, so that it doesn't look as if we just high table talking to you or something. You know what I mean?
Yes.
That's democracy.
Thanь you.
Center for Media and Peace Initiatives here in New York City. This is now your home, so anytime you're in New York City, we invite you to stop by and have a dialogue with us.
Thank you very much.
We look forward to seeing you again at some point.
Thank you very much for admitting me into this membership of this unique family, the Center for Media and Peace Initiative. I am very passionate about peace, and I accepted the membership wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You mentioned about journalism needing to be independent. I'm a little cynical when we see the way media is now being produced. We're seeing more and more of these giant media conglomerates, something like, for example, Clear Channel, coming in, gobbling up all these independent newspapers and these stations. And basically what they're doing is they're presenting news with a corporate bent, where it's a political bent right, in many cases on the right. So for example, Clear Channel takes over a paper in, say, San Diego, but also in Iowa. They want the same political direction for their news, and so if a journalist goes out and uncovers, say, corruption on one side of the political aisle, they may tell the editor, we cannot have this type of stuff going out over our airways or in our publications. So that's of concern to me. And the other thing too is that how can we overcome the preponderance of social media sites that pander and share less than quality product? I, as a writer, read articles on the internet that wouldn't even pass muster in high school, let alone a college journalism course. So those are some things that I saw in that end. And His Excellency, the ambassador from Botswana, was very much on point in terms of getting education out. I have some concerns about corruption. For example, if you look at the People's Republic of China, corruption is always ongoing there. And they don't play around. Those guys are put to death. You'll see in China all the time, people have been tried for corruption and they're given an execution. It's not years in jail, they're dead. But yet corruption still occurs. So I'm wondering if there's something structural in the world. I mean, I understand here in the United States, if you have wealthy people and they're corrupt, they go into a business, they raid their own business, or they take money that belongs to other folks. That's one thing. But on the other hand, you have some people in developing countries that can't make ends meet, So almost, I wouldn't try to give them an out and say they're moving to corruption because this is how they survive. I mean, corruption certainly, as the minister said, has to be prosecuted. But there are some structural issues. So that, for example, if I'm in Nigeria or in Ghana and a police officer needs a bribe, he's on a lower level, and maybe he needs some of that funding in order to feed his family. So there's, you know, a certain difference there between him and, say, some guy that owns a record company stealing money from his own record company or stealing government money to do a program. So those are just some points that I saw out there. And like I said, the minister's comments and both of your excellencies' comments I thought were right on point. And clearly, you know, the United States has no way to sit here and say, we, you know, there's plenty of corruption here in this country as well, and in the developing world throughout Europe. So we really are not in a way positioned to be starting to tout and, you know, rail against the developing world and say, oh, your countries are corrupt, because we're corrupt too.
I agree with you completely about the problems that you pointed to in terms of the press, and I can't speak to exactly how things are in countries in Africa, but in terms of the general situation, the structural aspect of it, I think that media that are for profit and that rely on corporate, you know, ownership and to have a, you know, incentive system that pushes them toward being corrupt and being less independent. And one example I'd point to in the realm of another model, a different structural model that is a not-for-profit journalism, Democracy Now! Is an example of a news organization that doesn't depend on corporate funding, and it's a strategy to be more independent. In terms of the problem of social media, as you were saying, it's a double-edged sword, as you were both saying. On the one hand, you wind up with a lot of unvetted information that social platforms aren't inclined to control unless they're forced to by regulation, and I think we probably need more regulation to force them to put more controls on when there is misinformation there. But at the same time, it allows for public engagement. It's unprecedented the amount of public engagement we have. So I think we have to nurture the positive public engagement while at the same time regulating the technology platforms, not the journalism platforms, but the technology platforms that have up to this point, at least in the U.S., you know, under our own regulatory regime. You mentioned how important the legislation is, the Section 230 that allows these companies to basically do whatever they want, not worry about the content that users put on there. That needs to be revisited for these giant technology platforms, because otherwise it winds up with a situation of just rampant misinformation, but also other hateful things that promote a culture of corruption.
Yeah, thank you. I know those were not questions per se, but comments. But I would say you're absolutely right. I mean, there has to be a difference between a police officer accepting a bribe because, of course, they want to feed their family. That also speaks to another issue that, I mean, there is also certain things that can induce basic corrupt practices. I mean, if you find to be in a vocation that underpays you and you have to have so many responsibilities, it doesn't surprise anybody that, you know, the example you gave would be there in our societies. We also have those in Botswana, as I said. But one other thing that you mentioned is, what about those who are already having access to significant amount of resources, but we are seeing globally there seems to be not enough wealth the way it looks like, even those who have wealth. And you are drawing a good parallel there, so I would agree with you, and those are the real cases which we should be going after. Of course, corruption is corruption, whether it's done at lower level or not, it has to still be pursued. You have also made another point, which is about the measures that different countries take to punish corruption. You've rightly, correctly said in some countries it takes the extreme end. In other cases, of course, there is some relative leniency. I would give one example. Botswana is currently, because I'm trying to show you that sometimes no amount of deterrence can be sufficient. For example, Botswana has remained one of the few countries that still retains the death penalty when somebody kills another person, right? But one discussion and debate or pressure that we are facing, today by those who would prefer that we really abolish that, they are making a point that if it hasn't stopped anybody from killing, why are we keeping it? So I'm just drawing that parallel that you will find that even in the most extreme cases where people are really brutally dealt with, it doesn't stop. So maybe that is something about human behavior which really has to be studied further and analyzed. But absolutely no amount of action sometimes does result in any change. But it doesn't mean we should stop. We should keep doing what we can to deal with corruption.
Well, I certainly agree there. I just know that the Chinese are very effective with their trials in terms of processing and punishing. So it's not like the United States or Botswana where there will be, constant appeals. What I understand in China, if you're corrupt and you're found guilty, you're not going to be sitting in a jail for 20 or 30 years. You're going to be in that jail. They're going to carry out that sentence. And these are not low-level people where I see these are government ministers. And if you look at any of these issues where they have mayors and government ministers out in the hinterlands of China who are getting arrested for corruption, and within a year, they're gone.
Let me chime in on.
Let me just step in. Just quickly. I think it's a big debate, I think, relating to how one country deals with this. But just to make a few comments. One is there are different forms of corruption. Some involve money, some involve exchange of certain privileges. And at times, how do you deal with them relating to a political system that clearly is nepotistic, even if it deals with issue of money? It's a big debate as to how to do that. But I think I get your point concerning the structural element. You can understand or forgive more easily small people trying to survive. I can see that. The only problem is that a police officer who begins to extort on the street, even when he becomes the highest paid, will still take because it becomes a habit. It's a big issue how you address that. So other elements have to do with what we teach. Maybe teachers of religion or ethics or values or in whatever way will have also a role. It's not just what is written, but what really gets people to say that this is not right. Whether I will be caught or not, I should do what is right. So these are difficult questions to answer.
Actually, talking about coercion and persuasion, sort of, because you're talking about China. I was just having a conversation with the minister, and he wanted to chime in on Buhari's first, engagement in power when he had the war against indiscipline. That was a military regime. They used force to do certain things. Now this is a civilian government, so he could probably look at the two extremes. To see sometimes using force may not necessarily achieve the desired impact versus when you approach a persuasive approach. Because I think persuasion gets more ingrained than when you force someone to do certain things. So, Minister, I think you can talk more on that.
Thank you very much. Well, in terms of approaches to the fight against corruption, the best approach, no doubt about it, is preventive. But then, within the context of prevention, you must equally go further by way of being accommodative of other measures. We were living witnesses in the 80s what the act of persuasion, ownership, and collective participation had done to the Nigerian situation, where President Muhammadu Buhari, working with Ediagbon, has, within a shortest period of time, succeeded in a kind of bringing the whole country together, both in terms of attitude and in terms of perception and in terms of execution of a project of the fight against indiscipline and corruption. There are traditions still prevailing in places like Lagos, where before the 1983 situation of the country, nothing like organized, perhaps maybe queuing arrangement in filling stations or perhaps in bus stops exist or prevail. But because the public had taken effective ownership of the war against indiscipline and corruption, that attitude that was instilled arising from that perception of the need to be orderly and organized in doing things survived the 1980s to present day as far as those particular identified bus stations are concerned in Lagos. So what I'm trying to say in essence, as far as the war against corruption or the fight against corruption is concerned, it is a battle that can only succeed when the public had indeed taken ownership of the process by way of bringing about the institutional or perhaps the attitudinal change required for so doing. But coming down to perhaps maybe example of people with limited means, I think in respect of any act of corruption out there, there are much more than 10 opportunities out there that you can engage with and avoid the possibility of engaging yourselves in corruption. So what I'm saying, China is succeeding in terms of elimination of corruption because of the strict liability, strict enforcement element of it. So in as much as you require the attitudinal change of carrying the people or perhaps general ownership of the fight against corruption, you equally require to a kind of juxtapose the fight within the context of attitudinal change, within the context of public ownership, and indeed prevention and enforcement. So there is no single approach that can work for corruption, but then it has to be a combination of all. So for example, the people of lesser means, if indeed you bring about the idea of other existing opportunities, it goes without saying that they will be willing and ready to now accommodate those other existing opportunities that are clean and pure for them in terms of engagement, as against the idea of perhaps finding in the spirit of corruption some element of likeness or perhaps some element of attraction. So I think the fight against corruption requires a lot of consideration, and considerations relating to prevention, considerations relating to attitudinal change, consideration relating to options of living, option of perhaps engaging in corruption, and option of pursuing other alternatives or opportunities that are not in any way tainted with corruption. Thank you.
A vote of thanks to the Honorable Minister for his presence here, for accepting our fellowship award, and we look forward to continued collaboration. We count on the Minister and his office for his support in our initiatives as we move forward with fighting corruption. We move forward with ensuring justice for the people of Africa and also ensuring justice around the world. So thank you again. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.